Hello and welcome, historians, to History 109, Mexican American History and Culture. I am so excited to start the semester with you, and I wanted to begin each week with a video message from me. Each message will give you kind of an overview of that week's topics, what we'll be learning, and some explanation about the reading or multimedia materials. So let's go ahead and get started with that. All right. History 109, Mexican American History and Culture. This week, our topic is Introduction and Selected Terminology, and we'll begin with a welcome from me, your professor, Dr. Summer Cherland. You can call me Dr. Cherland. Cher was the singer in the 70s, if that helps you remember. Cher, the singer, I Live in Her Land. Or you can call me Dr. C. Each is fine. Those are fine with me. Mexican American history and culture spans a huge amount of time when we look at local Southwest and global history in general. So we have a lot to cover in a pretty short period of time. So welcome. When you see this slide, and I'll actually start so that you can see the full slide, and you might see this icon in Canvas. This is a mural that was taken from a school called La Escuela Tlatelolco in Denver, Colorado. The school shuttered in 2013, but it was an amazing school. It started in the late 80s, maybe early 90s. So it didn't have a very long life, but it was started by Chicano and Mexican American activists, and it's a very cool story. So I love kind of referencing this mural that was done on the side of the school because it's a local effort to celebrate Mexican American heritage and culture. So when we talk about Mexican American history and culture, we're going to talk first about kind of the logistics of this class, and then we'll get into some of the more specifics with regard to terminology and history. We're going to cover a period of time that spans almost 4 centuries in this class. So if you think about it, we have 16 weeks together to learn about 4 centuries of material. And Mexican American is a word that encompasses, 2 continents in some cases of culture and history, and really 2 countries specifically when we look at Mexico and America. But, there's aspects of Mexican American history that is informed by or influenced by Spanish, Iberian Peninsula forces, and other parts of Latin America. So we've got a lot to cover and we've got a lot to discuss, and I hope you're excited. So here are some of the things that we're going to be discussing this semester. And there's a hyperlink here in this slide where it says this semester, and I'm going to show you what that takes us to in just a moment. But these are essentially the major topics we'll be discovering. We're going to look at the examination and origins and development of Spanish American and Mexican American people. We're going to look at Mexican American contributions to culture, history, and the development of the United States. We will take a specific emphasis on the Mexican American War and its impact on educational, social, and economic conditions of the Mexican Americans of the Southwest. More specifically to my class and how I teach it, we take a global and a local approach. So we'll look globally at some trends that span, the American Southwest, Mexico, the greater parts of Latin America, but we'll also look much more microscopically at the local history of Mexican Americans in places like South Phoenix. So my hope is that by the time you leave at the end of the semester, not only will you have, 4 centuries of content knowledge, which is a lot to try and get in, to 16 weeks, but you'll also have a broader understanding of Mexican American history, as well as how it influences your day-to-day at South Mountain Community College or in South Phoenix, Arizona, or just in the general Phoenix or Arizona region. So let's talk about your responsibilities, but let's do that in just a moment. Before we do, I want to show you what this hyperlink takes you to. This is the curriculum website for Maricopa Community Colleges. And as you know, South Mountain Community College is one of 10 Maricopa Community Colleges. So we are affiliated with this larger district that spans the entire metropolitan area of Phoenix and all of the greater Maricopa County. So our class is called Mexican American History and Culture. It's History 109. You actually, by taking this class, earn 3 course attributes. a C for cultural diversity, an H for historical awareness, and an SB for social and behavioral sciences. I'm not going to go through this whole thing of course competencies with you, but I wanted to point out that we are expected to cover 18 major themes of Mexican American history and culture in this class in order for me to have done my job with you. That means you're required to learn a lot. You're required to read a lot and to analyze a lot and to explore a lot of content. So when you get to the end of the semester, if you look back on what you've discovered and what you've learned, my hope is that you'll be impressed with yourself. But if you're kind of unhappy with like how the class turned out, if it comes down to materials or teaching style, I would hope that you give me that feedback for sure. But if it has to do with content, like you don't like the things we learned about, you didn't really care about learning about Mexican Americans in Texas, you didn't really care about the history of California or Chicano activists of the 1970s, this just may not have been the class for you. So something to consider, this isn't just with regard to my class, this is with regard to any class you take in Maricopa or really at any higher level institution. Every class has an outline or a framework that it's expected to meet every semester. But let's go back to your responsibilities. What is it that I expect of you? I expect that you work hard in this class. This is not an easy class in the sense that you can't just like sleep through the semester or ignore the class all semester long and then in like the last 4 weeks or 3 weeks of the semester just get a bunch of work done. This isn't that kind of class. This is a class that builds on itself. So it's smart for you to get acquainted to the process and the pacing of this class right away. If you have any problems or you're falling behind early on, well, sure, I absolutely encourage you to reach out to me for sure, okay? So your job is to get focused fast with this class because we have a lot to cover. But at the same time, I do want it to be fun. So I try to make the weekly challenges, which we'll talk about in a moment, engaging and interesting and fun and a little bit creative. So even though this is a class where you'll be working hard and you'll be reading a lot and you'll be learning a lot, it's not a class that requires like major research projects or major huge scholarly essays. I think that you're going to learn better with what I call research bursts. And that is like week-long research deep dives, you know. If you've ever done a deep dive where you've been interested in like a small, interesting problem, like what's the most popular food in America? And then you Googled it and then you started like down a weird rabbit hole where you learned all the things that Americans eat a lot of. I think the number one food now is bread, right? So it ends up being something really basic. But if you've ever done a deep dive like that, that's the kind of approach we'll take in this class. I'll give you a challenge or a question or a topic for that week, and you're going to dive deep into it. And then we're going to move on to the next week. But until you know what you know, you can't learn the next thing. That's the thing about history, is everything builds on itself. Okay, so you're probably wondering what your workload is. Here's your workload. Every single week, you will get an announcement from me, and it will include weekly readings. You'll be assigned something to read. Usually it's going to be between 3 and 4 articles, and they're usually going to be relatively short. Every single article will include the access point, so how you get to it, and I'll show you how to do that in a moment, or the download file, and it will include how long I think that article should take you to read. Pay super close attention to those suggestions. If I give you a suggestion of 15 minutes for this article and you find yourself working on it for like an hour and a half, either you're trying to multitask and you're not paying attention, or you're reading too deeply and you just need to start scanning. You just need to start looking through the article instead of reading it verbatim or line by line. So those are some things to keep in mind. You'll also have a weekly challenge. Every single week, I will give you some, challenge or goal that I want you to meet. Some of those challenges might be writing. Like I want you to think about this question, read these materials, and then write in the discussion board an answer. A lot of times they're going to be really different though. They might include you taking a selfie or a picture of something. They might include you doing a video message like what I'm doing here. I might ask you in a weekly challenge to draw or to plot things out in an outline or a timeline. That's simply because I want to engage you in ways other than just rote writing and transcribing. Also, when your neuron pathways are making connections in your brain, that's how you learn. So when you intentionally make connections between content, material, and then styles of learning, it makes information more meaningful in your brain. So the goal is to kind of diversify the way you learn. One of the other things that you'll be doing in this class is you'll be doing something pertaining local Mexican-American history. Most likely that will involve working with or studying aspects of the South Phoenix Oral History Project, and we'll get around to that later on in the semester. So to give you a pretty good idea, that means you're going to spend between 6 to 9 hours of self-paced reading, writing, and review. That's a formula established by our federal accreditation partner. So the national government or the national people who tell us that we can award degrees suggests that for every 3 credits you take, you should be learning and reading and writing outside of class time 6 to 9 hours. So that's how much I try to create for you so that you're getting your money's worth and your time's worth in this class. So you're probably wondering, well, if there's reading every week, where in the world do I get that reading? So we don't have an assigned textbook in this class. I decided a while ago that I thought textbooks were too expensive, and we have a treasure trove of materials through our library. So instead of having a textbook, to make it more cost effective for you, we're going to use all materials from our community college library. This means you're going to have to learn how to navigate the library system. It can be challenging. I will tell you, it is not an easy system to navigate, in part because of the security firewalls that are put up so that people can't corrupt or manipulate links in our library system. So one of the benefits of taking my class is that by the end of this class, you will be very comfortable with our library. So when you take other classes and you have to do a research project or you have to use library sources, you'll be a pro. But that does mean that you might get irritated in the beginning of the class, and that's okay. Every single week, you will get a reading list from me. All materials, unless otherwise noted, will be available via the library. So all materials. If it's not a library material, it will have a direct link to an external website, and that should work. If the link doesn't work, that's weird, you know, or it'll have a downloadable PDF, or it will actually be like embedded in Canvas. So here's a heads up. As part of the expectations of this class, you are responsible for finding and reading all of these materials each week. In order to understand the library system, I want you to attempt early, meaning now, and often to get acquainted and comfortable with our library. The thing is that I'm trusting you to learn how to use this resource. And while I welcome your content questions, like if you want to engage about the content of what you're reading, please do like reach out to me when you want to talk about content. But if you just email me like, I can't find the source or the link is broken, that's not going to help your grade, right? That might tell me that something's up, but there are ways to get to sources if the sources are difficult. So I'm not going to go ahead and like coach you through the library for the rest of the semester. I will coach you for these first 2 weeks, and then I'm going to leave you on your own because I know you can do it. So do not panic if there is a source in a reading guide or in a reading list that you cannot get to, especially if it's a library source. I'm going to show you how to respond if you cannot access a source. Okay, so here is our library landing page, and I'm actually going to navigate to it in a moment and show you how to use the library. So this is the library's website. If you can see my browser, you'll notice that right up here, I have bookmarked the library's website on my personal computer. I strongly encourage you to do the same because you will use this every single week, okay? There's a couple things for you to consider. The very first thing I want to point out to you is right here on the bottom left corner where it says questions, just ask a librarian. This feature will be incredibly useful to you because it's a 24/7 chat where you can talk to a librarian if you cannot find a source. They will be more helpful than me. If you want to get a source and you can't find it, a link is broken or something's not working, the librarian's going to be more helpful because they're available 24 hours a day. I'm not. So this way you can resolve it at 11:30 at night when your assignments due at midnight. Okay, so let's practice. Let's see what happens if we try to use the library. Here's the example. For week 1, which you're in right now, we have a reading list. It's called Introduction and Selected Terminology. You'll notice that there are on the reading list several articles I want you to read, and 2 of them have a link that says click to download. That's because those are not library sources, and I just uploaded the PDF file for you. However, you'll notice here where I write find. This is an article that you need to read, and it's in the reading list, and it's called Civil Rights, Hispanic and Latino, UXL Protests, Riots, and Rebellions, Civil Rights in the Modern World, edited by Tracy Vasil Viscontini, and this is the link. Okay, so what I'm going to do first, this is the snapshot on the PowerPoint. I'm going to take you directly to the reading list. That's the same reading list right here in Canvas. Here's one article that I want you to read, and that's click to download. This is something else, but this is the one that we mentioned, right? Civil Rights, Hispanic, and Latino. I've intentionally set this up so that you have a roadblock. Civil Rights, Hispano, and Latino. This is the book that it's in, and there's a snippet of it that's available via the library. And this link is here because when your professor, me, puts the citation in Canvas, it automatically generates a hyperlink. But I'm going to show you what happens when you click on the link. You're going to get a blank page that says blank #locked. And that is because you have to be authenticated through the library system in order to access library materials. That's just because there's been a data breach in the past. And so they have to make all of our available resources, including Canvas, email, etc. Everything has to be authenticated in order to access it. But not to worry, right? Instead of freaking out, here's what I would do. I would take this title, Civil Rights, Hispanic, and Latino. And I know it's in this book, and I know it's in Gale. And I would go to library right here, and I would start with one search. So here's one search. I'm going to paste this title in here and search. Civil Rights, Hispanic, and Latino, okay? And let's see, it should be in a book called UXL Protests, Riots, and Rebellions. UXL Protests, Riots, and Rebellions. Let's click on it. All right, there's the article, okay? Here we go, Civil Rights, Hispanic, and Latino. And it's in this book, UXL Protests, Riots, and Rebellion. Editor Tracy Vasil Viscontini. Here we go. There's my article. And you can see that it's like 3 paragraphs long. Let's try clicking on the link again now that I'm authenticated, because did you see how it took a minute to let me in? That's because it was checking my security. Let's just see if it works. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Nope, blocked. Okay, so that's what I would do if I immediately couldn't access something because of the link. And I put on the reading list at the bottom. Remember, if the links do not work, please click to download when available. If you are still unable to access library materials, first be sure you're logged into the library system, then search in the library database for the title you're looking for. And then finally, if you still need help, you can ask 24/7, ask a librarian. So if I click here, I could write on here, my name, right? And then I could write my MEID, which I won't tell you what it is, but you can find it. And my question, I'm looking for this source, right? And then you would start chat and the librarian would help you find your materials. So if you find yourself in a situation, this week is normal, next week is normal, week 3, you should be able to figure it out, okay? So in order to submit assignments and contact me, everything will be done via Canvas. The best way to find what's due is the Canvas calendar. So you'll go to the calendar and you'll look for our class and you'll see what's due. Most things are going to be due on Tuesdays and Thursdays in this class. Sometimes there might be a Wednesday or a Friday due date. You can also go through grades or syllabus where you click on your grades and you find the assignments that have not been submitted yet. You can search by deadline. The other way you can find your assignments is through this link right here where it says modules. And the modules are organized by week. So you can remember like, okay, we're in week 1 right now. Here's where your assignments would be. We don't have any assignments posted right now because the class hasn't started yet. But that's another way to find your materials. Another way to find what's due and your reading list is every week I'm going to send you announcements. So you'll get a written and video announcement from me with the reading list as well, and an explanation of what's due. If you need to contact me, I would strongly urge you to contact me via Canvas. That's the best way to contact me. I check Canvas daily, sometimes not on Wednesdays, but Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday mornings. So I would send the email to me directly through Canvas. It's the best way to contact me. But you can also text me Monday through Thursday before 9 p.m. at my number 928-699-8073. Okay, pause the video for a moment, take a little break, make sure you kind of have navigated through the class, and come back because we're going to talk about this week's reading. All right, welcome back. So now let's talk about selected terminology. We're supposed to discuss that as our very first way to get started in a class about Mexican American history and culture. So I think that there's just some basic terms that we need to discuss before we get started. So let's get into it. The first is labels, identifiers, and names. Now, not everybody feels comfortable taking on a label or an identifier, but for the most part, there are several different ways that people of Mexican American or Latino descent might call themselves. And these are personal decisions, right? These decisions come from your own introspection, your own understanding of politics, culture, and identity. And some of you may resist this altogether. And some of you might not identify at all as Mexican American. So it's something to take into account, right? That not everybody identifies in one blanket way. But there are several that are pretty common. So the first is Chicano, and every one of these things you'll be reading about this week. So there's a pretty decent article, it's relatively short, by Roque Planas, and it's called Chicano. What does the word mean and where does it come from? When I studied for my master's and my PhD program, I really became enamored with the idea of the Chicano identifier. I think Chicano is really interesting. It's a political association along with a cultural association. It's rooted in a very specific historical moment. So what you might think of when you hear the word Chicano might be very different from what I think of when I hear the word Chicano. And that might be because I have a very kind of scholarly approach, whereas you might have a more realistic approach based on what your parents have taught you, etc. So something to think about, right? What does a college professor think the word means versus your mom or dad? And that can be, both can be very important, right? Both can be really informative of your own understanding. The next is Latino, Latina, and Latinx. Interestingly enough, the word Latinx has come under significant debate in just the last couple of years, maybe even just the last year. And there's a really great short video done by the University of California called "What's the Difference Between Hispanic, Latino, and Latinx?" And with regard to that, the word Hispanic is covered as well. Hispanic, again, has a very specific historical context. And so it's interesting to look at, why some people might call themselves Hispanic, whereas others would reject that term altogether. And it just has to do with kind of where in the Southwest or Mexico you might be from and the political or cultural emphasis in your life. Both of these terms, or both of these aspects of these terms, Latino, Latina, and Latinx, as well as Hispanic, are covered pretty well in this short film called The Difference Between Hispanic, Latino, and Latinx. The film, like I said, is done by the University of California. And the UC system is really the origin of the ethnic studies and Chicano studies movement in the late 1970s. So they're the experts. They're the ones that would be the ones telling us what we think. So you get to define your own terms based on your own identity. If you're not of Mexican or Mexican American descent, this may not pertain to you, but those of you taking this class because you're interested in your own culture and heritage, you might find this conversation really very interesting because it helps you define sort of who you are. But remember that each of these terms comes from a moment, comes from a historical moment. It comes from generational understanding and political influences. And your personal identifiers are going to be very personal to you, which is why I do not ever assume that all of the students in my class are one way or the other, right? However you identify is up to you. Now, I want to make one caveat. Regardless of how you might refer to yourself or your friends, we don't allow for any slangs or slurs in this class. So you might see it when you read things, particularly when we get to the 1970s and maybe the 1940s too, where we're learning a lot of the political language that was used. Some of it's harsh, right? Some of it's really, really harsh. So you might read it and you might quote it, but you will not use it in this class. And I won't tolerate any sort of, slurs or even just curse words in general. That's not appropriate for an academic environment. All right. So let's be really cautious about that. Slangs and slurs are not accepted in this class when you're interacting in an academic way. Even if you refer to yourself in that way casually or with your friends, it's not appropriate for a college classroom. So here are some other terms you're going to be exploring this week. I have a link to the Mexican America glossary done by the Smithsonian Institute. And I think it's fine. I don't think it's like the best glossary I've ever seen, but it's something, right? You can see that there's about, I don't know, maybe 4 pages worth of content. You don't have to research or study any of this. I just want you to get acquainted with some of the more interesting Mexican American glossary terms. And in fact, I reference a couple that I think are really interesting. So pay close attention to the Smithsonian's definition of Aztlán, of California, Tejano, and Hispano, Manifest Destiny, the word mestizaje, the Mexican-American War, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and they might mention something about Vietnam organizing. These are some really big concepts that we'll be discussing quite a bit in this class, so maybe get acquainted with those this week. All right, one of the last sources that you're going to be considering is the Latino Americans Timeline of Important Dates. And this is done by PBS, which is public broadcasting, which is a free source, a free educational source. It's on cable TV and also online. And you can see there's essentially from 1500s to 2000s, so centuries of dates that are highlighted. About, again, 4 pages of scrolling. Just look through it. You don't have to know anything. You just have to look through it. You'll notice there's years, significant events, and multimedia embedded. Take as much time with this as you like. Focus on the things that interest you. So that's it. That's what you're working on this week. Are you excited? Me too. So let's get started. It's been really great getting to know you a little bit, and I hope that we'll get a chance to know each other even better this semester. Again, remember, if you have questions, email me in Canvas or text me 928-699-8073. And you can find all that material in these slides, which I'll post in Canvas. All right, everybody, good luck. I look forward to an awesome semester.